but one of the first things that struck me is, at what point did you decide that you were going to be on camera, which was not necessarily self-evident? You could have very easily just been a ghostly narrator, but you didn't choose that.
I think after leaving Las Vegas, I decided that I always had to be on camera because I think, I have to name drop it, I think Julia Roberts once said, I'm only interested in the DP, that's where the money is, and I went, okay. And I'd been watching a lot of television at that point. I hated being on the monitor, and so from leaving Las Vegas onwards, I started operating, and it was like the connection with the actors was immediate, and I never looked back from that moment. And for me, it was always about camera is so important, and I need to be there. I need to have that connection with the subject. But on Megadoc, it was also like I wanted the footprint to be so small and not to telegraph, no boom, no kind of like people carrying lights. So it's just me, Tara, the producer, and then two students,
I realize now I may have phrased badly, because not only are you on camera in the sense of operating, but you appear in front of
Oh, you got your question. Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of time on a film like this to hang out, and I was like, I just had the impulse to talk, and I just also think that it's a way of giving access to the audience about, so you're not just looking through a piece of glass at something going on. I was puzzled, and I'm going to share, like my inquisitiveness about what's going on and what's going to happen and all of that. I didn't know if it was going to end up in the film, to be honest, and in fact, I was advised to take myself out by Ellie, who saw an early cut of the film. It was too much of you, so I took some of me out, but I did kind of like, and also took a lot of other stuff out as well, but yeah.
And a very interesting thing that you say quite early, which I'd be fascinated to hear you expand on, is that you have this very fascinating multivalent career where you worked as a musician, you worked in theater. You said you've never seen another film director on set, which is, I'm not going to say especially unusual, but some people come to the job by working their way up through the ranks. Some people come to it acting first and having that experience. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what some of the takeaways were from.
Well, you end up with an idea because you've made a bunch of films. That's how you make films, and you're curious about other people. And I know a lot of directors, and I get some sense, but it's like a marriage. It's like somebody once said, never presume to understand the secrets of a marriage, because when they close the doors, it's a different world, And I think the same with film. When somebody starts making a film, however nice they are, you think they are, or however cool they are, they become a different personality. I know I become a monster sometimes. Sometimes I see people, I've shot some video, and I see myself and go, why are you a fucking monster? So I know I go through a personality change. So I was curious about Francis Ford Coppola. I obviously knew quite a bit about him as a filmmaker beforehand, but I was really curious to see what would his process be. And I read the script, and I went, that was like, wow, how is he going to do this? So I just jumped in completely kind of blind, and went, let's see what happens.
And were there any particularly blindsiding things being on a set and not being the director, at least not being the director of the production that was the principal point of focus, where you're like, oh, I never would do that.
I don't think I would have gone that far, but there was things like, there was a lot of internal, wow, really, okay, 4 cameras, okay, all that equipment, a lot of cable. I was just fascinated by how much equipment there was, and for me, like, it was a pleasure to see all that, because for me it would be a nightmare to have that much stuff to deal with. That many people asking questions, a nightmare, I sort of sympathized with Francis, but on the other hand, it was his choice to do it that way, so yeah, completely fascinated.
Just to be clear, the director of Time Code found 4 cameras.
Yeah, but that was only 4. I mean, Francis did a real-time film with like 28 cameras, and like 63 ADs and all the rest of it, and single screen and all of that. So I'm always looking for like, what's the smallest way you can do something that, so you don't impose yourself on the narrative too much. Like the equipment should not dominate the film. And I think contemporary cinema is an example of complete technical dominance and, you know, business, technology, all those things. And, you know, it's like, you have to ask the question, the technology is so good. I went out this morning and I shot some stuff on my iPhone and it was like, wow, this iPhone is so good. I took a bigger camera with me and then I just used the iPhone. So the question would be, why would you choose to shoot a film these days on a big camera? Why would you do that? The answer, of course, is because it's a huge weight of kind of pressure on you to shoot it that way, because it's a business, and you know, and it's jobs. It's, you know, as Bruckheimer once, I interviewed him once, he said, he reminded me, like, Mike, it's called the film business, it's called show business, and there's a reason for that, and there is, you know. So to me, I was like, how can you get as far away from the business as possible and then make a movie? And of course the technology is there now to do that, and yet everybody is kind of blackmailed into, you've got to do it this way. Young filmmakers coming up, you know, their aspiration is to shoot it on an Arriflex. Beautiful camera, but it comes with 5 guys, you know, and about 5 miles of cable, and 6 monitors, and then a bunch of technicians afterwards. So you are already crippled by the number of people you have. So by the time you get to shoot the thing you want to shoot, you know, you have to go through all those processes, and you know, your energy gets depleted very quickly.
And Coppola kind of realizing how cumbersome the mechanism that he's saddled himself with is for this production, that really becomes almost, I would say, a subtext, a running subtext of the movie, is somebody who, and it's somebody who in fact had made smaller films, you know, Youth Without Youth, Teatro, Twixt, etc., and was suddenly getting
And
back.
going back to The Outsiders.
Yeah, yeah.
Rumblefish, beautiful, small film.
And the frustration of somebody who kind of wants to have that run and gun freedom and realizes, you know, even if it's your own money, you still have these like lines of command that you have to work through.
Well, the irony really is also that he invented a lot of that stuff. Him and Lucas, they kind of prepped the world for the Marvel Universe, and that they then really don't like it. They don't like what the genie is totally out of the bottle now, and it now dominates. You know, so yeah. I mean, all those kind of really interesting, ironic things about the culture clash between that generation of filmmakers who still want to make films in a certain way, but like I said earlier, the industrial complexity of, you know, the sort of smothering blanket, and he even talks about it in the film, doesn't he? He talks about Cassavetes, and kind of, I still to this day don't know if he, was he being ironic because he's sitting on his own set, surrounded by his own chaos that he's been paid for. And he's talking, and he says, cinema is the only art that kills its babies, or something like that. And I go, yeah, that's true.
I mean, up to a point, it's true.
Yeah.
I would to backpedal a little bit. I wonder if you could just talk about your relationship to Coppola prior to this, and how this came about, that you became the fly on the wall of the Megalopolis.
It's a Coppola story. So I met Francis the night of the Oscars for Living Las Vegas. Nick had vanished way beyond the horizon, never saw him again. But I ended up sitting at a table at the governor's ball, I think it's called, with Francis. And we had a really interesting dinner and just talked a lot. He was a talker. And we sort of started a friendship, which was very tenuous in the sense that occasionally emails, he came through London, we had dinner, very pleasant. And so I kind of like was able, if I wanted to, I could write to him once a year to say hello. I did something for his magazine, and then I heard that he was doing Megalopolis, which I had no idea what it was, but it seemed fun, you know, like good for him. He was going to do this film, and so I just wrote a letter and said congratulations, and then cheekily put, you know, if you need a fly on the wall, let me know. And he did it for ages, and then suddenly got an email saying, have you got a visa? Could you be here in 2 weeks? Like, what the fuck, okay. And it was an offer I couldn't refuse.
I recall reading in a recent interview with you that Coppola didn't know you were the director of Time Code, even though it corresponds so much to, you wrote a book that came out maybe 5 years ago now called Live Cinema and Its Techniques, which is, you know, very much about trying to infuse some of the unpredictability of live theater into a cinematic experience. And I would have thought coming into this, that, oh, obviously he was a big Time Code enthusiast.
No, I mean, to the extent that he said, we were talking about real-time filmmaking, he said, have you seen that film Timeline? And I went, Time Code? And he went, yeah. And I went, oh, I directed that. He said, you did? I really like that film. And I love that about Francis, because he's in his Coppola bubble, and in a sense, his universe is his universe, right? And he sort of has a kind of vague awareness of the world outside of that bubble, I would say. So he was really pleased to meet the director of Timeline. And then he told the actors that I directed Timeline. And Shia LaBeouf said, what the fuck's time code? You know? So I had to explain to him, you know, and then it's very funny. So she says to me, you know, what is your connection with Francis? And I said, through Nick. And he goes, Nick who? And I go, Cage. And he goes, oh, you know Nick? And I went, yeah. He said, how do you know Nick? I said, well, you know, through Leaving Las Vegas. Sort of humble brag. And he goes, well, what was your connection with that film? I directed it, and wrote it, and did the score. And he went, what the fuck are you doing here? With your little shitty little camera. You know, like, I mean, years ago I did a Cannes. Somebody, because I'm a photographer, someone said, would you like to do a pop-up, you know, like portrait show? And I did it. So I actually set up on the beach in a pop-up tent. I did a photo show, you know, and I'd meet all these Hollywood types. Mike, what are you doing here? Got a movie? I went, no, I'm a beach photographer. There'd be this moment like he's shitting with me, and I went, no, I'm taking photographs on the beach. And you'd see this look on their face like, oh fuck, he's really fallen. It showed such promise, you know. And then, you know, like Pedro Almodovar, he literally cut me dead. He was my friend, you know. And we had that, you know, beach photographer, and he suddenly went, he spotted someone on the other side of the room at the Vanity Fair party or something. He was gone. I've never seen him since. You know? So, you know, so yeah, it's kind of interesting. I got very happy and comfortable with this idea of being like out of the spotlight and just being able, because it's kind of a blessing in a way. You get to do some weird stuff yourself, make a little short movie, do a little experimental here, do some music, and you're not being bothered by the pressure of what's your next movie, right?
And this too is a point, I think, of affinity between Coppola and you, because you know, we were talking outside about my great admiration for The Loss of Sexual Innocence, which comes on the heels of Leaving Las Vegas, and you grabbed the brass ring, and you, I mean, and this, in its own way, was a project I know you'd had kicking around for decades at this point, and you suddenly have this cultural capital to burn, and give the world maybe not what it wants, but
I mean, you know,
what it needs.
To make films in any shape or form is such an immense privilege because it's expensive stuff. Now not so, I would say. Now it's not, it shouldn't be expensive anymore, but it is. And to be able to make the films that you want to make. So when I was living in Los Angeles, the thing was, you know, if you weren't in pre-production when you were in post, you were somehow a loser, right? And you got infected by that, you know. So getting out of LA, I mean, Leaving Las Vegas was my get out of jail card, but of course it was a success, so I was fucked, you know. And I got offered then a really big movie and a big paycheck, so I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was leaving. So then I did lots of Sexual Innocence, a bunch of movies that kind of went, oh, he's gone. And so I was able to leave that, you know. But yes, to carry on making films, and then I kind of devoted my time to the macro approach to cinema because it's all about freedom, and very happily, yeah.
And I mean, talking about budget, we touched on this again outside. One of the things I think is so special about Megadoc is how like punctilious it is about explaining where the money goes on a film set, and that information is more and more difficult to find. I mean,
you know, the inspiration. Somebody said, "Did you watch, Ellie's documentary Hearts of Darkness?" And I went, "No, I avoided it like the plague. Not deliberately, but I just wasn't going to watch any movies about making films. I wanted to go in kind of clean eyes." But I would say that the book that inspired me was a book by Lillian Ross called Picture, which is the first kind of real kind of forensic examination of it. It's a John Huston movie, The Red Badge of Courage, and she does the whole thing. Goes through the budget, goes right through the kind of screening process, the issues with the studio, and then Huston's gone, so somebody else takes over basically. But it went from the beginning, pre-production, right through the distribution of the film. And I remember reading that before I started making films, and it made such a deep impression on me about, okay, that's the structure. This is kind of feels truthful to me. So when I came to Megadoc, I wanted to pursue those same ideas about, what is the structure here? Where is the money going? That fascinates me, because when you make a budget, when you write a script now, actually, unless you're really dumb, you've got to be writing the budget at the same time. So it's pointless writing a great scene that is unrealistic, too many extras, too many locations, all the rest of it. So, when I write now, I kind of write, there's a great quote from Godard, I want to do the t-shirt, it would go, show me the budget and I'll show you the film. And I think it's one of the wisest things for filmmakers, right? So, yeah, that would be the approach now.
Yeah, and there's such a vested interest in keeping those numbers out of the public eye, in part just to conceal what a complete fucking boondoggle the picture business is.
Yeah, but of course, as the quote from Michael Betterman, the producer, when I say to him, what's different about this movie, he says someone who might say no, Francis. And so Francis, everything was very transparent in that respect. It was here's a bunch of sort of his money. He took out a mortgage, and I was able to go anywhere I want and ask those questions.
And then another thing, you say you didn't rewatch Hearts of Darkness, Elmer Coppola's movie. There's a reference to Werner Herzog that is made, which obviously had something to do with Les Blanc's Burden of Dreams. Even if you didn't rewatch any of these movies, you still have a kind of idea of that precedent. And it's funny, but it's true. Nobody's ever made a film about or written a book about it. It was such a great shoot. We had the best time. Nothing went wrong.
Yeah. There's that other quote, isn't it? Nobody ever went to see a film because it came in on budget.
But in a sense, you must almost feel like you have to become like a shark sniffing the water for the scent of blood for some kind of conflict.
Yeah, you're always looking for that, because otherwise, where's the drama? At the end of the day, all films are dramas, right? And what would engage people is this, because we love a drama. We really do love a drama, of course. Very good reason why films exist and why theater exists and why novels exist is because we want to constantly re-explore those, problems that are universal truths, about our relationships, whether it's making a film or marriage or whatever it is. Yeah.
And I could be overstepping here, but speaking of film and theater, the relation of at one point early on in the kind of pre-production process, somebody, I forget who, said it's like some kind of experimental theater troupe being put together.
Plaza,
yeah, and it's pretty unusual, especially when you're dealing with actors whose time is worth that much money, to put together a sort of theater camp exercise like that.
Francis says to me in one of the early interviews, I think just before the first day of principal trophies, between you and me, nobody knows how strange this movie is. And he was absolutely right. Looking at the totality of it, You know, Coppola, it's remarkable what he did. He got a bunch of his own money. He put a kind of volatile collection of people together, and he basically he denies the chaos theory, but of course it's bullshit. He loves chaos, but it's creative. You know, he's quite right what he says. I fix chaos, but what he doesn't cop to is that you create it in the first place. You know, in order to fix it. So to put that all together and then see what happens. And when he says like beautiful things like what we tried today, but he did this wonderful moment where the art department are kind of going, oh my God, you know, he's like using a $200 Epson projector and he's shining some wriggly worms onto Adam Driver's face. You know, they've got like a multi-million budget to do this in post. And she says very politely, I think we could have like helped this a little bit with a few digital effects. And he's going for this kind of, it's almost like a Coen Brothers moment where the young German kind of performance artist guys goes, yes, we have tried with a lenticular mask, that didn't work so well.
With like an iPhone and a projector on a piece of particle board.
I mean, that's so superbly bonkers in this day and age of like the way we make movies that you kind of go, fuck, go for it, man. You know, it's like, keep it coming, you know, like, and maybe inspire people to take a few more risks. Like, experiment, see what happens rather than the fucking 3-act structure in a prison.
And I think we have to wrap here, but I will ask you, you know, you said earlier, like you've seen footage of yourself on set and thought, what a fucking asshole.
I didn't say asshole, I said what a monster. But actually, you could add asshole.
A monstrous asshole.
A monstrous asshole.
Have you had any feedback from people featured in Megadoc regarding how they look?
Yes. But my lips are sealed. I mean, it's always like the expression conspicuous by your absence is as far as I can go.
Well, I mean, what I find really special about it is that it really isn't loaded, and rather you watch it with perhaps particular prejudices, and you can come out thinking one thing or another.
Sure. Yeah.
Where like Shia can look like a total bozo, or if you're an actor who has ever been left twisting in the wind by your director, can look, I think, quite sympathetic.
I tell you, he was a godsend, both to me and to Francis, I would say. Because, you know, Francis needs grit, he needs response, he needs to be pissed off with somebody, you know, and then carry that through. And their conversations are like priceless. My favorite one, and they're talking about the reality of film. And what's great is now it's like, no, it's flickering light. No, it's not. And he kind of goes, Figgis is filming this, and people will watch it. You watched it tonight. And I love the fact that cinema within cinema moment. And he said, and he goes, yeah, it's flickering light. You know. So they have these really cool kind of debates. They know they're on camera, by the way, so of course, right? So they're both actors. I mean, Francis is as much of an actor as she is. So yeah.
I'm afraid we have to wrap it on that, but thank
No
you.
time for a question.
Let's be anarchistic.
Yeah.
One or two questions from the crowd.
I just want to say it was great. I love film, and I was curious. What are your thoughts of what Coppola is going to do next?
What Coppola's going to do next? So I had dinner with him in London when he was passing through, and he said, "I'm planning a new film." I said, "Can I humbly give you some advice?" I'm really humble. I said, "Francis, do something really low budget, you know, and have more fun, as you want to have fun, you know, like my little Nick on camera, that would do fine. It's 4K, it looks pretty good." He said, "No, it's going to be low budget. It's really." I said, "Well, like what?" And he went, "You know, 20 million. And I went, "Francis, that's not low budget." But he's dropped that down to 8 now. So I sincerely hope he does do that, and I hope it's a tiny budget that he has to then do a Francis, you know, and actually, because he's Francis, he'll do it. Shoot it on the iPhone, Francis. Everyone will love you for it, right? Because it will be truly experimental then. And get a bunch of young hipster musicians to do electronic score for you, some DJs or something. Yeah, get away from all the kind of stuff that's kind of dragging you down to the bottom of the pond. Yeah.
And I'm, sorry, right here.
You show a lot of archival footage, it seems like, of the 2001 table
Yeah.
read, and some footage that was shot in 2003. What did you decide to use from that, and did you try to kind of reach out? I mean, Giancarlo Esposito was in that table read.
Yeah.
Did you kind of talk about the differences kind of that progression, or try to get people who were also at that table read to interview?
Well, there was so much, complete access to all of his archives, and there is literally hours and hours and hours of it, because he archives everything. So Joe Wyszynski, who did the first, was the editor up to a certain point. He fell in love with the archive footage. I didn't. It's like, and I kind of think, what am I, B-roll? So I drastically cut down the archival footage, just to the point where it's kind of nice interplay with what's going on now, but keep the present tense moving. But of course, it's fascinating, and you could make a documentary just of the archive footage. There were talks about, using the footage and making a little series for Netflix or something, 6 parts, just focus on the budget, or the archives, and blah. You could do that for people who are really into all of that. I just wanted to make a film that kept moving. One last question.
Sure, I have one.
Yeah.
First, thank you. It's a wonderful film. I learned an enormous amount. How do you feel the vast number of people who were involved in the making of this picture, how are they dealing with the commercial failure of it?
How are the people who worked on film fitting? Well, I would say I hope they're working, number one, because, immediately after that was a real panic about what's my next job. So we're going back to the Bruckheimer, it's a film business thing, and I was in Atlanta, and everybody had moved to Atlanta because this was the new Mecca, and they're doing all these kind of Marvel things there. And then suddenly there was like, there's a couple of strikes, and then now AI is like the monster that's hovering above the industry. So it's more a question of like, what is the future job security for that kind of the people who worked on the film? Often taking out a second mortgage and buying a house in Atlanta because the work was there. But then LA is completely screwed now as well. There's no one shooting there because it's so expensive. So, I mean, the big question about what's going to happen with the film industry is a big one. So I think there's going to be like a huge rift between, let's say, independent filmmaking, really low budget, and so what is cinema now? I mean, I think like Instagram is cinema now, YouTube is cinema. I'm looking at opening a YouTube channel just as a kind of like, as my own little studio. But then I can put a 10-minute film on, or a feature, or I can reissue a movie. So like questions about, it's not really answering your question, but I would say the future is really just hanging there by a thread now. It needs very decisive, dynamic activity from young filmmakers. Rethink distribution, do all that stuff. Okay, they're going to throw us out. Thank you so much.
Is time closed tomorrow night at the Roxy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's on film. With real changes.
Woo!